Today we are at Perth Concert Hall for the debate, Does Science and God Mix? Professor John Lennox, thank you for joining us this evening. Can you please tell me a little bit about the talk that you're going to do at Perth Concert Hall tonight?
I'm going to be speaking tonight on the topic, Do Science and God Mix Cosmic Chemistry? In the light of the often thought idea that if you are a keen scientist or an intellectual, you couldn't possibly believe in God. And I want to point out that that is a misunderstanding both of God and of science.
That's very interesting. And where do you sit on this topic?
Well, I sit on the God side. I'm a mathematician who believes in God. And I see no more conflict between being a scientist and believing in God as I would say that there's no conflict between believing in Henry Ford and believing in the law of internal combustion as explanations for the motor car. It's pretty black and white in the sense I think that logic, rationality and everything else lead us to God. But the problem is so much fog has been generated. First of all, by people misunderstanding the nature of God. And secondly, by them misunderstanding the nature of science. And I hope to put a few correctives in there. So I hope to be clear, but it's up to the audience to decide. I'm talking to intelligent people. What I want is a good discussion. And let's put the ideas out in the public marketplace and let the people judge. And that's what I've tried to do in all my debates so far. So I try to avoid the heat and generate a little bit of friendly light.
Oh, that sounds very nice. And what type of sort of specific topics will you be covering?
Well, I'll be talking a little bit about misunderstandings about the nature of God, because people have got it into their heads these days that the God of the Bible is a bit like the God of thunder in the ancient Greeks that's easily dismissed by science. So we'll be talking about that. But secondly, I'll be talking about the nature of explanation and how we get hung up by failing to see that scientific explanation is only one kind of explanation. You know, why is the kettle boiling? And you can say, well, we're heating it and the water is getting vibrated faster and faster and steam is rising. That's the scientific explanation. But I could say it's boiling because I want a cup of tea. In other words, there are two kinds of explanation. There's the scientific one and there's the agent one. They're totally different. They don't conflict. They complement one another. And so it seems to me that science is thinking God's thoughts after him. Scientific explanation doesn't conflict with the God explanation because they're different kinds of explanation.
That's very interesting. So for the people that believe that if it cannot be proved by science, then therefore it doesn't exist, what would you say about that?
Well, what I'd say about that is they don't quite understand what the word proof means. Because proof in my field of mathematics only occurs there, the rigorous kind of proof. Ordinary proof that we use in everyday life means, well, having sufficient evidence for something. I can't prove to you that an aircraft will get me from Sydney to London, but I have to stake my life on it. So it's evidence beyond reasonable doubt, that kind of thing. So I'll be advancing evidence. Logical proof you cannot get. I mean, I can't give you a mathematical proof that my wife, to whom I've been married for 46 years, loves me, but I'd stake my life on it. So we're talking about a broader thing because God is not a theory, he's a person. And commitment to persons is a much different level of thing. The evidence comes in at all kinds of different levels.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure.
Hello, welcome to Cosmic Chemistry, presented by City Bible Forum. Tonight we're here to ask the question, do science and God mix? And we're privileged to have with us two scientists to explore this topic. Dr. Carmen Lawrence is Winthrop Professor of Psychology at the University of Western Australia, and Dr. John Lennox is Professor of Mathematics at Oxford University.
But my great privilege is to introduce Professor John Lennox. Many of you will know a great deal about him, and you've probably seen some of his lectures on YouTube and other places, or read texts, or even his books if you're lucky enough. John Lennox is a Professor of Mathematics at the University of Oxford, and I understand there are some mathematicians here with us this evening. He's also a Fellow in Mathematics at and Philosophy of Science and a Pastoral Advisor at Green Templeton College at Oxford. He teaches for the Oxford Strategic Leadership Program at the Executive Education Centre in the Saïd Business School, also at Oxford. John has travelled extensively, including in former communist Europe and Asia, and as a result is able to converse in numerous languages. As you know, he's written many titles on the interface between science, philosophy and theology, which is why he's with us tonight. Please welcome Professor John Lennox, who will speak to us on cosmic chemistry, do science and God mix?
Do science and God mix? They obviously do. For some people, they don't for others. There is a very widespread impression that science has made faith in God both unnecessary and false. But it cannot be so simple as that, because last year's Nobel Prize for Physics, for instance, was won by Peter Higgs, a Scotsman who is an atheist. And a few years before that, the same Nobel Prize for Physics was won by Bill Phillips, a Christian. What separates them is clearly not their science. They both reached the top of the tree in physics. What separates them is their worldview. And so the main question, I think, to be addressed is, in which direction does science point? Does it, as Richard Dawkins suggests very strongly, point towards atheism? Or does it, as I would wish to suggest equally strongly, point towards theism? And what I wish to do is to give you several of the major considerations that influence my thinking, looking forward to the questions that you will inevitably ask. The deception of modernism, the supreme deception of modernism, is the idea that the laws of nature explain the world to us when all they do is to describe structural regularities. You see, the law of gravitation is a work of genius. It enables us to, from a very simple mathematical formula, tell that the orbits of the planets around the sun are ellipses. It enables us even to do sufficiently accurate calculations to land somebody at the moon without any of Einstein's corrections. But it doesn't tell us what gravity is. God requires more evidence than the commitment to some simple proposition. But unfortunately, there's a second side effect of this redefinition of the word faith. It's that what escapes people's attention is the business of science being faith-based. That may surprise some people. I find it surprises an increasing number of people, but Einstein realized it very clearly. He said, I cannot imagine a scientist without that faith. Now, he wasn't talking about faith in God, of course. He was talking about faith in what we might call the rational intelligibility of the universe. Or more simply, believing that science can be done because the universe is based on certain rational laws. And my teacher of quantum mechanics at Cambridge, Professor Sir John Polkinghorne, makes this point endlessly in his books. Physics is powerless to explain its faith, note the word, in the rational intelligibility of the universe, for the simple reason you have to believe in that intelligibility before you can do any physics at all. Many of my atheist friends, and I have many at Oxford, when I ask them what the mind is, they say it is the brain. And when I ask them what the brain is, they say, well, essentially it's the end product of a mindless, unguided process. And then I gently say, and you trust it? I find that curious. If your iPad or iPhone or whatever you like, if you knew it was the end product of a mindless, unguided process, you wouldn't trust it for a moment. Now, interestingly, this doubt about rationality goes back to Darwin at least, and probably long before him. He said, with me, the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. And that doubt has begun to worm its way into the intellectual world, not simply of people who believe in God, but of distinguished atheist thinkers like John Gray, Professor Emeritus of the History of European Thought at London University. Modern humanism, he writes, is the faith that through science humankind can know the truth and so be free. Ladies and gentlemen, we started with two worldviews. Let me put them another way as I close. The first worldview, the materialistic one, is that there's nothing in this universe except mass and energy, essentially. And everything else is derivative, including life and mind and the idea of God, because there isn't a God. The other worldview is this: in the beginning was the Word. All things were made by him. All things came to be through him. So the two worldviews are starkly contrasted. The first one has mass energy primary and mind derivative. The second one has mind primary and mass energy derivative. Cosmic chemistry? Do science and God mix? Yes, they do. The second one has mind primary and mass energy derivative. Cosmic chemistry? Do science and God mix? Yes, they do. Cosmic chemistry? Do atheism and God mix? Do atheism and science mix? I think with great difficulty, because these arguments, I believe, show that atheism doesn't only shoot itself in the foot, it shoots itself in the brain, and that's usually fatal. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, don't go anywhere. We'll be back with more Perth City Talks in just a minute.